Working with a timeline in Animate can be a little confusing sometimes because there's so many options. And depending on exactly what kind of animation you're doing, can really determine which type of animation you use. And the way to do it is separate also. So let me just start with the simplest animation in the world. I'm just going to take a rectangle tool. I'm going to draw out a square. I'm going to be a real square, so I'm going to hold Shift key down. And I'm just going to animate it from one side of the stage to the other. Now, this is a shape, and that's what we've been working with so far. So I'm going to do a 1 second animation that's 24 frames, and you can see the 1 second up here. Now, the easiest way to do this is to insert a keyframe. Keyframes are the places where animations are marked. So for instance, my starting location here, and as a matter of fact, I'm just going to make this easy. I'm going to go up here, whoops, and I forgot my stroke. So double click that so I can get my stroke and my fill. And I'm going to hold it up to the very top level here, and so my X, Y is 0, 0. So the keyframe that you see here is saying position X, Y, 0, 0. So now I can create a frame, and I'm just going to show you briefly how this works. If I insert a frame in 24 seconds, and I now pull this over here to this edge, then what happens is, because I only have one keyframe, the keyframe information changed to down here. So I did not achieve any animation. Let me go back in time here. Okay, so to get a animation going, I have to have information at the start point, and then I have to have information at the end point, and the only way I can get information at the end point is to create a keyframe. So now that I have this keyframe selected, and by the way, if you notice, when I select the keyframes, everything on that layer is selected. So now I take the second keyframe, and then I pull this down, and if I run this animation now, and I'll just hit return to run it, you see what happens is that it just pops into place there at the last second, because this frame animation has the original keyframe extending all the way across the line till I get to the last keyframe, which then inserts this information. So I'm just going to go ahead and publish this, or actually just show this, and you see what happens when it's on a loop. Not exactly what I wanted. What I'd like to have is the rectangle move from point A to point B incrementally. Now, instead of having to put keyframe after keyframe after keyframe and move it just one frame at a time, I'm going to insert what's called a tween. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated. So I have motion tween, shape tween, classic tween, and convert to frame by frame animation. Now, if I did want to create a keyframe per each movement, then I could use this, and there are certainly different variables that you can use. Every frame, every other frame, third frame, fourth frame. By the way, if you keyframe 3 to 4 frames, you get that real jerky animated look, which can be somewhat kind of cool if you're doing an artsy animation. Now, if you do because this is a shape, I'm going to recommend shape tween. I'm not going to recommend it. I'm going to say you have to use shape tween. And I'll do that right away. And then if I set it up correctly, I'm going to see a solid black line. And as you can see, as I just randomly click in between, it's going to move. I'm going to hit return. And you'll see that I now have the animation that I was originally going for. Like that. Okay. One little side note, when I published this, you may have noticed that the square was animated in this limited area here. And if you want to animate the whole thing across the page, because right now it's set to very specific parameters, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Publish Settings, and I'm going to click Center Stage, which means this will now center align. And you see you have horizontally and vertically. I would usually use both. That center aligns the animation, i.e. the stage. And then by making responsive, and again, responsive would be by width and by height, and then scale to fill the visible area. I got fit in view, stretch to fit. Stretch to fit will distort everything, so I'll stick with that. And then I click OK. Now I'm hitting Command Return. That is Control Test or Test Movie. So Command Return, easier to just establish. And now it's going across the stage. And because it's responsive, it can actually fall into the area that it is. By the way, center stage in the responsive view will get something like this, where it is trying to go into center. So be careful. Just think about your settings when you publish this. Now again, I'm talking about shape tweens here, and I'm going to add another element here. In fact, what I'm going to do is in my fill, I'm going to change it to blue. I'm going to create a circle, and I'm going to do the same thing. Take note, I'm going to animate this circle from the top right corner down to the bottom left corner, but take notice that this is all on the same layer. So when I go here, the circle disappears, by the way. So I'm going to grab that circle back. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it down here. Now, you may think that the circle and the square are going to cross each other in the center, but watch what happens. Oops. In fact, to be honest with you, I didn't really know what was going to happen. Animate basically takes the shape. So watch what happens when I select the keyframe there. Both images are selected. Both images are selected. I should say graphic. Graphics are selected. And therefore, they're going to animate the closest possible way. So let me go back in time here and get rid of that circle. Let's see if I have it up there too. I'm just going to select it all and delete it. If I want the circle and the square to cross paths, what I have to do is create a new layer. So when you're animating objects, when you animate shade objects, they will either combine, they will mutate together and then cross apart, or in this particular case, they'll provide an unexpected result. Now in this case, and by the way, I'm going to do Command Shift V, and that will paste in the place that I copied it. And that is a really, really useful thing. You can do like multiple layers, Command Shift V, and it will paste it in exactly the same place that you copied it. Very useful, and we'll talk more about that later. But now when I create the last frame, and again, I'm going to insert a keyframe, and I always do the right-click command because it's right there and it's a lot easier. You could also do insert in the menu and then timeline and then frame, keyframe, and all that. That's a pain. So I just like to do right-click, insert keyframe. You kind of have to think a little bit ahead on some of these things. And then I'm just going to right-click in the center of those two, and then I'm going to insert a shape tween. So now I've got exactly what I intended on, like that. So now I'm going to test the movie. And as you can see, it's in a loop. If you want to change what object passes over which object, you can just click the layers and move them one on top of the other. I'm going to go ahead and I have a tendency to forget to label my layers. It's when you start working with multiple layers, that can be really important to label your layers. So now the square passes over the circle. All right, pretty simple, right? Now the problem is, I'm just going to create a new layer here. Problem is this. I am going to create, and what the heck, I'm going to create a star just so you can see this. So I hold the polygon tool, click the tool setting options, and take the point size to maybe 10. Okay, doesn't matter. I'm going to use polygon instead. This guy is going to, let me click the transform tool. The transform tool is where you can actually start rotating. So I'm just going to rotate this so this is straight up and down like that. I'm going to have this drop straight down. Now, in this particular case, I am going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and insert a keyframe. Notice that before I push it down, because I have to establish the value of the first keyframe, set a second keyframe, and then move this down like that. I may want to say, you know what, I want to do a motion tween. In fact, to make this easier, I'm just going to do a classic tween. Motion tween and classic tween have very similar variables. And we're going to go into this in much more detail later. I just want to tell you for now, do not worry about motion and classic tween. Personally, I feel like Adobe shouldn't even allow us to do motion or classic tweens on shape layers, because this is what happens. I'm just going to do classic tween. And it says you must, and I'm glad they at least put this message up. You must convert frame content to a symbol in order. And I'm like, well, I don't read these things, so I'm going to click OK. And the first thing you may notice is that I now no longer have the shape capabilities. And everything seems okay. And this is where it's a little heinous. If you look in your library now, you have Tween 1 and Tween 2. I honestly do not know why Adobe lets you do this, but what this just did was it converted this shape into a symbol. But not just a symbol, it converted it into two symbols. Now you may ask, why do I care? For a simple animation like this, not going to matter. But when you've got, say, I don't know, 100 animations like this, and you've got Tween 1 to Tween 5000, you're going to be really hurting because you don't know which tween is which. And because it's tweening between two separate symbols, I can tell you from experience that things come up and you'll run into problems. If you have Tween 1, Tween 2 in your library, you didn't do it correctly, even though Animate lets you do that. And it's really been a big pain. So I'm just going to go back in time before I did that nasty little shape tween. And if you want to turn this into a symbol, and we'll talk about symbols in a later discussion, but if you want to turn this into a symbol, what you need to do, first of all, I'm going to delete this keyframe because you have to go all the way back to the original thing, and you have to right click and convert it to a symbol. And I'll call this hex. All right. I don't care which symbol type. You got movie clip, you got button, you got graphic. Just stick with movie clip. Click OK. So interestingly enough, after I created a symbol here and I went back in time, I still have Tween 1 and Tween 2. It's really heinous, and I really wish Adobe would stop doing this because it's very easy to make this mistake, especially because you can. So I'm just going to get rid of these manually. I just click the trash can at the bottom to get rid of those. Now that I've got this symbol, I'm going to create a keyframe, insert keyframe. I'm going to pull this object down, and I'm going to insert a classic tween. We'll talk about motion tweens and classic tweens later, but I don't want to get too complex here. The easiest one to work with is the classic tween, but you have to create 2 keyframes to create a classic tween. And then now you'll get everything. But notice that over here, the hex symbol animates with itself as it should, not between 2 separate symbols with a generic name. So just keep that in mind. It's real easy to forget, and for people just starting with this, it makes it extremely difficult. I'm just going to label this layer. I want to try show you another aspect of shape tweens, because that's really what we're focusing on here now. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call this morph. And then I'm going to turn off the eyeballs for each of these other layers here. In the morph layer, I am going to create a square and a circle. I'm going to have one shape morph into another. So my first shape is going to be a square. And to kind of sort of add a little more interest to this, I'm going to talk a little bit about gradients. I'm going to add a gradient to this square. Now the easiest way to do this is just go to your color palette, which is Window, and then click Color. And then below here, I'm going to select Linear Gradient. And then now to apply this gradient, you have to have the shape selected. So there's my linear gradient. And I created this dark green to orange gradient. You can change your colors by double-clicking the square and choosing which color you want. I'm just going to keep that the same. If you want to add a third color, just click in between and double-click that. And I'll just add some crazy thing. That's awful. So if you want to delete it, just click and drag it off, and it's gone. There's lots of ways you can control your colors. You can also pull the slider over so that it's more orange. But what I want to show you is also the transform tool. So when you click the transform tool, which is the third tool in your tools palette, if you click and hold that, you can click the gradient transform tool. And this will allow you to rotate it, compress it, expand it, move it off the center. It's a really cool tool. In fact, Animate/Flash had it before Illustrator had. I'm just going to compress this a little bit so it's a little bit more of a distinct gradient there. Now, my second layer, my second frame, I'm going to right-click the frame 24, insert keyframe there. I'm going to delete this square. First of all, select that. Just hit delete. I'm going to draw a circle down below, and I'm going to change the fill. Let's just do a solid color here, and I don't care what you do. Let's do something crazy like a red. All right. So now, frame 1, frame 24, and then of course I'm going to insert my shape tween. And what you're going to see here is you're going to see the shape morph into the circle. And what Animate does is it basically increments the frames so that it goes frame by frame closer and closer to the end shape. That's a morphing situation in Animate. Of course, the easiest thing you can morph is square to circle. Notice too that it kind of rotates a tad. Well, actually it doesn't rotate a lot. See the corner? If you keep an eye on the corner there, and as I move it across, the corner kind of moves up a little bit so that it kind of ends up there. If you don't want that rotation to happen, you can go into Modify, Shape, Add Shape Hint. And let's just say I'm just going to pull the shape hint on the first frame and pull that up to that corner right there, and then I'm going to take the shape hint there and put it kind of approximately in the same place. This kind of pins the morph down. So now that shape will not move. It will just press in to the circle. So you got rid of that minor rotation. And if I hit Command Return, well, now as you can see, all animations are taking place, even though in my timeline I turned these out. If you do not want to see these elements, you actually have to trash them. Now when I hit Command Return, there's my morph. Just one last little thing. I'm just going to go over some basic things to remember about keyframing. When you go into the menu, first of all, I'm going to create a new layer here just so we can see something. And something also kind of cool, because I already have my hex symbol in there, I can just click and drag this multiple times, and I can use this as many times as I want to. So again, it's a symbol. Symbols are created in the library, and you can pull them in, you can rechange, you can resize them. Let me go back into my free transform tool. I can resize them. You know, so for instance, if I had a star symbol, I could populate the stage with multiple stars. We will go through symbols in much greater detail later, but that's just kind of an overview. So if I'm going to animate this, and let's say I create a keyframe here, and again, I have not talked about motion tweens yet. Don't worry, we will get into that. But for now, I'm just working with classic tweens and shape tweens. Classic tweens for symbols, shape tweens for shapes. So I'm going to, I can do a number of things. I can insert a keyframe, which we've worked with. I can insert a blank keyframe. If I do that, that means that that keyframe will delete anything off the stage. So sometimes I may want to just wipe the stage clean. So a blank keyframe is useful for that. Also, I can take a tween here, and I can right-click that and then convert to keyframes, and then it will take that element right there and turn that into a keyframe if I need that. Just know that. And I can convert a keyframe to a blank keyframe and so forth. All right, so I'm going to create insert keyframe, and I am going to pull that over here to the side. It's just a simple animation. Now I'm going to right-click that again, and I can clear, to get rid of a keyframe, I clear keyframe. I can also do all these other things too, but I'm going to clear keyframe, and that gets rid of the keyframe there. Another thing too, when you see this gray area here between this keyframe and this frame, but you notice there's no black dot at the end there, that is these are all frames. Now, if I don't have a frame, so I'm just going to go ahead and select this frame there and say I want to get rid of that. So I right-click that again. I can cut frames. Cutting frames means I take the frame and I remember that. In other words, it puts whatever was on the frame into my pasteboard. I can copy frames. These are kind of cool. I can clear frames. Now, if I clear frames, that's going to delete that by one frame. So if I wanted to select all these frames and get rid of them, I would shift-click the first and the end, like that. Hold the right-click down, and then I can do clear frames there, and that deletes all frames. And then if I click there, now for some reason it inserted a blank keyframe. So now I just clear a keyframe there. Again, I'm going to hold shift click all that. And then I am going to clear frames. And that will now delete. What I have now is I have a keyframe here, and then I have a blank keyframe there. What that does is it just takes out all stuff in the frames themselves. Now, if you just want to get rid of the frames altogether, select them all, holding the shift key down, right click there, and then just remove frames. You can also insert frames. I can insert a frame here. Now, the thing about that is that as long as you have a frame there, as long as the frames are there, that object with the keyframe that's established by that keyframe there will always be there. That's why you would want to have frames there, and then you would put a keyframe at the end if you wanted to move this object. Now the last bit is really cool. I use this a lot. Let's say I select all this, and I want to take this animation and I want to put it in a different location. Let's say I want to put it in a different file. I can right click, I can copy frames. I'm going to create a new file. And I am going to, now I can, if I do Command V, which is paste, it only pastes the object that I originally selected. But watch this. If I control click that keyframe and I paste frames, I have all of that animation added, exactly same place, same animation, everything. That can be a real great time saver down the road.